Welcome to another tutorial. In today's video, we're going to dive into everything you need to get started with PivotTables, and even take it a step further. So stay tuned, because in this tutorial, you're guaranteed to learn something new that will help you work more efficiently in Excel. Let's get started. For those of you who are just getting started, a pivot table is a powerful feature within Excel that allows you to summarize large sets of data in a simple and dynamic way. It lets you organize your information, analyze trends, and even present your findings in a structured report that's easy for others to understand. That being said, before we go ahead and create a pivot table, it's a really good practice to first convert your dataset into an Excel table. I personally always do this, and here's why. When your data is inside a proper table, any new data you add later will be automatically recognized and included when you refresh your pivot table. This makes your analysis much more efficient and prevents errors. To do this, simply click anywhere inside your dataset, then go to the Insert tab and click on Table. You'll notice that Excel automatically selects the full data range. Also, make sure the checkbox labeled My Table Has Headers is selected, which it usually is by default, and then click OK. Quick tip: if you want to create a table even faster, just press Ctrl+T on your keyboard. That shortcut instantly turns your data into a table. Now let's move on to creating a pivot table. Click anywhere inside your table, go back to the Insert tab, and choose Pivot Table. A dialog box will appear. The first option shown is your data range, and since we have already turned our data into a table, that range will be automatically filled in for you. Then you'll need to decide where to place your pivot table. You can choose between placing it in an existing worksheet or creating a new one. I highly recommend selecting the new worksheet option because it helps keep your work clean and easy to manage. As for the last option in that dialog box, we'll come back to that later in the video. So for now, just go ahead and click OK. Now on your screen, you'll see two main areas. First, the blank canvas where your pivot table will be displayed, and second, the Pivot Table Fields panel. This panel is where we'll do most of our setup. It contains a list of all the column headers from your original table. At the right of this panel, you'll notice four areas: filters, columns, rows, and values. This is where you drag and drop your fields to organize the data exactly how you want. To better understand how this works, let's go through an example. Let's say we want to display all employee names along with their respective salaries, and we want each name to appear on a separate row. To do this, drag the name field into the rows area. You'll see that all employee names are now displayed in the pivot table. Next, we want to show their salaries. Since salary is a numerical value, we'll add that to the values area. You can either click on salary, and Excel will automatically place it in values, or you can drag it there manually. Excel recognizes that this is a numeric field, and by default, it will calculate the sum of all salary values for each employee. Now let's take another example. Suppose we want to calculate the total salary by department instead of by individual employees. To do this, first remove the current fields from the pivot table by dragging them out of the field areas. Then drag department into the rows section and salary into values again. Just like that, we now have total salaries broken down by department. Let's keep going. This time, suppose we want to calculate the average age of employees within each department. All we need to do is drag the age field into the values area. Notice that Excel, by default, will sum the ages. But we don't want the sum, we want the average. There are two different ways to make that change. The first method is to go directly to your pivot table. Right-click on any age value, go to Summarize Values By, and choose Average. While we're here, note that you can also choose other calculations such as maximum, minimum, count, and so on, depending on what you want to analyze. The second method is to go to the Pivot Table Fields panel. Click on the drop-down arrow next to the field name in the Values section, probably something like Sum of Age, and choose Value Field Settings. A dialog box will open. From here, not only can you change the summary calculation to average, but you can also update the custom name of the field so that it's more descriptive. Now let's talk about another useful part of pivot tables: the filters area, also known as the report filter. This option lets you filter the entire pivot table based on a parameter of your choice. In this example, I want to make a small change to the current layout. I'll remove the department field from the rows, and instead, I want to display the same salary data by position. But I still want to keep department involved, just in a different way. So instead of showing it as rows, I'll drag the department field into the filters area. As soon as we do that, you'll notice a new filter section appears just above the pivot table. This is where we can interact with our filter. Click the little arrow next to the department filter, and if you want to select multiple items, make sure to first check the box labeled Select Multiple Items. For this example, I'll go ahead and choose Finance and Logistics as the departments I want to include. Just like any table in Excel, you can also clean up and format your pivot table to make it look more polished. For instance, if you want to sort the salary values from largest to smallest, simply right-click on any salary amount, go to Sort, and choose Sort Largest to Smallest. You can also improve the way the data looks by formatting the numbers. Let's say we want to display the age values without any decimals. To do that, right-click on any cell that shows age, then select Number Format. In the dialog that appears, go to the Number category, reduce the decimal places to 0, and press OK. That makes your data look cleaner and easier to read. Additionally, you can change the labels in your pivot table to something more descriptive. For example, you can click once on the field name at the top, such as Sum of Salary, and rename it to something like Total Salaries. Just type the new name and press Enter. Let's say now that you want to remove the age data from the pivot table. Just drag the age field out of the Values section. Now suppose instead of showing total salaries, you'd like to display the percentage of total salaries. In other words, how much each position contributes to the overall salary budget. To do this, drag the salary field again into the Values area. Now we'll modify it. Go to the pivot table, right-click on any salary value from the new field, and choose Show Values As. In the menu that appears, you'll see several different options. For this example, I'm going to select % of grand total. Excel will now display the salaries as a percentage of the overall total, making it easy to compare how much each role contributes proportionally. Next, let's add some conditional formatting to visually enhance our pivot table. To do that, select any of the salary cells in your table. Then go to the Home tab, click on Conditional Formatting, and choose Data Bars. Click on More Rules at the bottom of that menu. Here's where we get more control. We can apply formatting either to just the currently selected cells or to all cells in the pivot table, regardless of how the data is filtered. To make sure the formatting adjusts properly when we apply filters or change the data, I recommend choosing the third option, which applies the rule to all cells showing salary values for position and department. That way, when the pivot table is filtered or updated, your conditional formatting remains consistent across the entire layout. I'll also choose to show only the data bars, change the color to green, and press OK. Let's move on to something else you can do with your pivot table: creating a pivot chart. Now that we've organized and filtered our data the way we want, we can create a visual representation. To do this, go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab and click on Pivot Chart. A window will open, just like when you insert any regular chart. From here, you can pick the type of chart that best represents your data. For this data set, I'm going to choose a clustered bar chart. Once your pivot chart is created, take a look at it. You'll see that the filters, legends, and axes are all represented. These elements are interactive, which means you can filter your chart directly, just like with the pivot table. For example, you can click on the department filter inside the chart and choose different departments or even specific positions. This makes your chart dynamic and easy to update without needing to go back to the pivot table. Now let's say you want to clean up the appearance of the chart by removing some of the buttons or axes. Go back to the Pivot Chart Analyze tab. Click on Field Buttons, and here you can choose which buttons to display. For instance, I don't want to show the field buttons for position on the chart axis, so I'll go ahead and remove those. Also, maybe you want the chart to be displayed in ascending order, from the lowest to the highest total salary. To do this, Right-click on the axis of the chart, go to Sort, and then choose More Sort options. In the dialog box, choose Ascending. Then select the field you want to sort by, in this case, Total Salaries, and click OK. Just like that, your chart is now sorted properly. And as with any chart in Excel, you can also add chart titles to make your visuals more descriptive. To do this, click the little plus icon on the top right corner of your chart, check the box for axis titles or chart title, and then click on the placeholder text to rename it. For example, I'll call this chart Salaries per Department. Just type in your title and hit Enter. Of course, you can continue exploring many other features of pivot tables and pivot charts, but for now, we'll stop here so we can move on with the rest of our pivot chart course. Now let's explore the tabs available when working with pivot tables, starting with the Pivot Table Design tab. When you click anywhere on your pivot table, the contextual ribbon appears at the top, giving you access to several new options. Let's go ahead and click on the Pivot Table Design tab. From here, you can change the visual style of your pivot table. There are many preset styles to choose from, ranging from plain to colorful, and you can preview how each one will look just by hovering your mouse over them. Additionally, you can customize how your table highlights information. For instance, you can apply banded rows and banded columns. These alternating shades make the data easier to read. You can also customize the appearance of column headers, row headers, and other formatting details. Now let's say we want to reintroduce the department field into our table. I previously had it in the filters area, but this time I want to display it as a row label. So I'll simply drag the department field from filters and drop it into the rows area. I'd like to see a total for each department. To do that, go to the Subtotals menu, and here you'll see a few options. You can choose to show all subtotals at the bottom of each group, or alternatively, at the top. And if you don't want subtotals at all, you can turn them off completely. For this example, I'll choose to display the subtotals at the bottom. You can also modify the appearance of grand totals using the nearby drop-down menu. Let's say I only want the column total to be visible, but not the row total. I can easily adjust this from the grand total section by selecting On for Columns Only. Another powerful option is to change the layout of your pivot table. The default layout is compact form, which combines all row labels into one column. However, you can switch to tabular form, which presents the data more like a traditional Excel table, with each field in its own column. I personally find tabular form easier to read in many cases. Once you're in tabular form, you might notice that repeated labels, like the department name, are only shown once per group. If you want each row to explicitly repeat the label, you can enable this by clicking Repeat All Item Labels. This is useful for exporting or printing the table, but I personally prefer it turned off, so I'll set it back to Do Not Repeat Item Labels. Additionally, if you want to insert a blank row between groups, there's a setting for that as well. It helps separate each category visually. You can turn this setting on or off depending on your preference. Let's now switch over to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, where we'll explore some more advanced tools. One common issue users encounter is losing access to the field list. For example, if you accidentally close the field list and then click back on the table, nothing shows up. Don't worry, just go to Pivot Table Analyze and click on Field List to bring it back. You can also collapse or expand groupings in your pivot table. For instance, if you want to temporarily hide the rows for a certain department, you can click the minus button next to the department name. To bring it back, just click the plus button again. You can also control whether those expand, collapse buttons are visible at all by toggling them off in the Pivot Table Analyze tab. Another helpful tool is the Clear drop-down. If you've applied several filters and want to remove all of them at once, go to Clear, then click on Clear Filters. If you want to reset everything in the pivot table, including the layout, fields, filters, and values, you can select Clear All. Let's say now that you want to move your pivot table to another worksheet. You can do that by clicking Select, then Move Pivot Table. In the dialog box that opens, you can choose a different sheet or create a new worksheet, and Excel will automatically move it for you. One of the most exciting and powerful tools for interactive reporting is the slicer. This creates a visual filter that makes dashboards and presentations more dynamic. Instead of using the regular filter field, you can insert a slicer that works in a more visual and user-friendly way. To create one, go to the Insert Slicer button. I'll select Department again as the filter field, and then press OK. The slicer will appear as a floating box. You can position it above your pivot table or wherever it best fits your layout. If you want to display more items horizontally, you can change the layout of the slicer. For example, if I want the slicer to show all departments in just 2 rows, I can change the column count to 3. Now all items are shown across 3 columns instead of in one long list. You can also adjust the slicer's colors, dimensions, and button size to better match your report style. It's highly customizable and enhances the overall interactivity of your dashboard. Before we wrap up this section, there's something very important to mention. Pivot tables do not update automatically when new data is added to the source. You must manually refresh them to ensure your data stays up to date. Let's test this out. Go back to your original employee data and let's make a change. I want to update the salaries for the HR managers because they seem off. First, I'll check how many HR manager entries we have. I'll increase both of their salaries to $10,000 each. Now go back to your pivot table. You'll notice the values haven't changed yet. That's because we haven't refreshed it. To do so, right-click anywhere in the pivot table and select Refresh. Now you'll see that the total salary for HR managers has updated to $20,000. Additionally, if you ever want to change the data source for your pivot table, for instance, if your range of data expands, you can do that by selecting Change Data Source in the Pivot Table Analyze tab. A dialog box will open, allowing you to adjust the range manually. For now, we'll leave the range as it is. Lastly, it's a good idea to rename your pivot table to something more meaningful. By default, Excel gives it a generic name like Pivot Table 1, but you can change it to something like Pivot Table Sales Report. Just remember, when naming pivot tables in the name box, you can't use spaces, so we use underscores instead. Also, it's important to know that you don't always need to create pivot tables from scratch. If you want to build a similar report using an existing pivot table, you can simply copy and paste it. Just select the entire pivot table, press Ctrl+C to copy it, then Ctrl+V to paste it wherever you like. Once pasted, you can modify it as needed. For example, instead of showing total salaries, I can now display the average age of employees. Simply remove the current field and drag age into the values area, then change the calculation to average using the value field settings. Now notice that the slicers are still connected to both pivot tables. That means when I use the slicer, it filters both tables simultaneously. If you want to disconnect the slicer from one of the pivot tables, you can do that easily. Click on the slicer to select it, then go to the Slicer tab in the ribbon. From there, click on Report Connections, also known as Pivot Table Connections. In the dialog box, uncheck the new pivot table to disconnect it. Now, when you interact with the slicer, only the original table will be affected. The second one will remain unchanged. Let's move on to one more powerful feature in pivot tables: calculated fields. Before we get started, I'll simplify our current setup by modifying the pivot table to only include employee names and their salaries. I'll also go ahead and delete the extra pivot table and the pivot chart that we don't need anymore, so we can focus on this new calculation. Now go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab, then click on Fields, Items and Sets, and choose Calculated Field. This is where you can create basic formulas that will be added to your pivot table as new fields. Almost like creating simple measures. Let's create our first one. I'll name it Salary Increase 5%. In the formula box, I'll select the salary field, click Insert Field, and then multiply it by 1.05 to increase it by 5%. Press OK. And now we have a new column in our pivot table that shows each employee's salary after a 5% raise. If you ever want to modify a calculated field, just go back to Calculated Field, and from the Name drop-down, select the one you want to edit. You can update the formula or simply delete it if it's no longer needed. For this example, I will delete it and press OK. Now let's try something a bit more advanced, a basic IF statement. We're going to create a new calculated field that assigns a bonus percentage based on the employee's salary level. So, head back to the Calculated Field dialog box, and this time, let's name it Bonus Assignment. Here's the logic behind it. If an employee's salary is greater than or equal to $9,500, they'll get a 5% bonus. If it's less than that, they'll get a 10% bonus instead. So type, if the salary is greater than or equal to $9,500, then return 0.05, which stands for 5%. Otherwise, return 0.1, which means 10%. Then go ahead and press OK. Now, when the field appears in the pivot table, you might notice all the values show up as 0. That's just because Excel is using the default currency format, and since these are decimal values, they're not displaying correctly yet. To fix that, right-click on any of the bonus values, choose Number Format, switch it to Percentage, and hit OK. And just like that, the bonus percentages are now properly formatted and displayed in your table. One important thing to highlight: calculated fields only support numeric values. They do not work with text or string values. So you can't use them for text-based logic or return words like high or low. Only numbers are supported. Also, keep in mind this is just an example. In real business scenarios, bonus percentages are usually calculated differently and might involve more complex rules or external systems. Before we finish this tutorial, I'd like to show you one simple but very useful trick. At the beginning of this tutorial, when we created the pivot table, there was a checkbox labeled Add this data to the data model. This option is especially powerful when working with Power Pivot, as it allows you to connect multiple tables together, something that's incredibly useful when dealing with more complex data sets. Let's go through a quick example. I have 2 worksheets, each containing a separate table. To connect these tables, we'll start by creating a pivot table. Go to the Insert tab and click Insert Pivot Table. This time, make sure to check the box that says Add this data to the data model. Then press OK. Now go to the second worksheet where the other table is located. From the Power Pivot tab, select Add to Data Model and press OK. Notice how Power Pivot automatically opens. Before closing this window, we'll create a connection between the 2 tables. Click on Diagram View to switch to the Visual Model Layout. From here, we'll create a one-to-many relationship between the 2 tables by connecting the ID field from the first table to the ID field in the second table. Once that's done, you can close Power Pivot. Now return to your pivot table. If you open the Pivot Table Fields pane and look under the All section, you'll notice that both tables are now available in your pivot table. You can now easily combine data from both sources. Let's drag ID and name into the Rows field and then add product description and sales. To clean things up a bit, you can collapse all the row items by simply right-clicking any of them and selecting Collapse Entire Field. And there you go. You've just connected 2 tables in a single pivot table using the data model. There's still so much more to explore when it comes to pivot tables, but what we've covered today includes the most essential and useful features to get you started. With this knowledge, you can build more dynamic, interactive, and insightful reports. If you found this tutorial helpful, please don't forget to like and subscribe for more Excel content. Your support truly means a lot and motivates me to keep creating educational videos like this one. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time with more tutorials.